Hello, today I want to show you one of the most interesting openings, which is called Caro Kann. This is where after e4 black goes c6. Okay, first of all, what is the idea of this move c6? Why don't black as usual play the e or the d pawn so he can develop his bishops faster? The idea of c6 is to prepare the move d5, but to avoid the Scandinavian defense, basically, where after d5 black has to take with the queen and then white attacks the queen with the knight. So black is preparing d5, and his idea is to meet d4 with d5. And now the difference from the Scandinavian, for example, is that if white takes, black will take with a pawn, not with a queen. And then he will have a pawn on d5, which is fighting for the center, and he is controlling the square e4. Okay, one small drawback of the move c6 is obviously that the knight from b8 now doesn't have so many options, and often the bishop from c8 is restricted a little bit. So with the move d5, let's say after d4, d5, black wants also to remove the pawn from e4, because now white has to defend the pawn with the knight. He can also defend with f3, although this is a rare line. He can, of course, take on d5, or he can push e5. If he pushes e5, it looks like the advanced line in the French defense. French defense is when black plays e6 and d5. But for example, if now black goes e6, he will be with the tempo down in the French defense, because normally here after e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, black should play not c6 but c5, and now white has extra tempo. But black, of course, will not play e6. The difference is that first he will move the bishop to f5, and then, of course, here white can play so many moves, let's say knight f3, and now after e6, if we compare it to the French defense, yes, black lost one move with c6, c5, but his bishop is not on c8, which is the main problem in the French defense. But yeah, this is on f5 where he's much more active. And comparing to the French, this is I think favorable for black. So of course white can play this line e5, bishop f5, or he can defend the pawn. In the past, most of the players were defending the pawn with the knight, knight c3 or knight d2. There is not a big difference between those two moves, because normally black has to take on e4. For example, you play knight c3. Okay, now if black don't want to take on e4, what can he do? He can play knight f6, but then after e5 he doesn't have a good square for the knight, because knight e4 you can take it and he will have this weak pawn on e4. So the only reasonable move which makes some sense is g6. This is also some kind of mixture between the Caro Kann and the Perk defense, where now white has a big choice from playing normal like knight f3, and then h3 is a very common move to stop the bishop to go to g4, and then again after knight f6 white can play e5, although this is a theoretical line, but black has to be prepared very well, because there are a lot of complications here in this line with knight g5. If black don't want to go into this line, he has to take on e4. But in this position, white has a small advantage, because he has the pawn on d4. And now usually black plays knight d7, because if he plays knight f6 immediately, white will take. And here the problem for black is that if he takes with the bishop, surprisingly white can play this move, and then he cannot castle. Or if he takes with the pawn, yes, of course this is possible, but then white also has advantage because black has, of course, these double pawns. And in the middle game, white simply has the d pawn, which is almost like an extra pawn. So black has to play knight d7. And then, white can play bishop c4 or bishop d3. There are different lines. Let's say bishop d3. This is one very common system. Knight takes and then castle, in which white has a small advantage, but black is very solid. So if black don't want to play g6, e6 now of course is closing the bishop, so he has to take. And this is leading to the one of the main lines in Caro Kann, where now black has three possibilities: bishop f5, knight d7, and knight f6. Knight d7 is preparing knight f6, and now white has also different possibilities from bishop c4, even knight g5. There is such a move, knight f3. Maybe you're wondering what is the idea of knight g5 and what will happen if black simply attacks the knight. Of course, now it will be a big mistake for white to move the knight back, but he can go to e6. This is a very small trick, which I'm sure that the members of the chess club will enjoy, because now if black captures, it will be checkmate. And black has to move the queen. In case of this check, of course, you have to move the bishop, because otherwise now already black can take the knight and to move the king. So the idea is that after bishop d2, eventually white takes the bishop, and he has small advantage because he has the pair of bishops. So this is one of the possible, let's say, traps. And now black usually goes knight f6, and after bishop c4, threatening checkmate, black has to defend with e6. And now white can play queen to e2, which is another trap. The idea is to sacrifice on e6 or on f7, especially f7 is more dangerous. For instance, again, this is losing because of knight f7. King takes, and now queen e6, followed by bishop to d3, and then checkmate. So black has to play here knight to b6 to defend the pawn of the bishop. And then again there is a trap that if black takes, now knight f3, attacking the queen, she has to move somewhere, and then after knight e5, black cannot defend on f7. So black has to know here what to do, because you see that there are so many traps which he can fall very easily. He has to play now some other moves like h6, and then knight f3. This is a very long theoretical line. Okay, another idea apart from knight d7 is knight f6 immediately. By the way, here there is another trap, but this is I don't recommend this trap, because there is some difference between the traps. Some of them are good when you play normal moves, but if you play some bad move hoping that he will make a blunder, this is not good. For instance, the trap with queen e2 is well known, and if black automatically plays knight f6, white wants to deliver this checkmate. But the problem is that if he plays e6 or the other knight to f6, attacking the pawn, now the queen on e2 is not doing anything, and she is blocking the bishop. So I don't recommend this move. Bishop f5 is also a very common line. Now the knight goes to g3, and the bishop goes to g6, because if he goes to e6, he will block the pawn. And here white usually goes h4, with idea to play h5 and to take the bishop. Black has to make some space, and then, this is very popular system, knight f3. Black can play, for instance, knight d7, and in this line, white often castles queenside. He has to trade this very strong bishop. And after this, the idea for white is to move the bishop somewhere to d2, f4, and to castle queenside. As for black, he can also castle queenside, but also he can play e6, bishop e7, and to castle kingside. Even if it seems a little bit dangerous, the game is very double-edged. And now let's go back in the beginning of this system. After e5, one very famous also line which you have to know is when white plays this very strange move h4. Maybe you're wondering what is the idea of this move. This is actually another trap, that after e6, which is a mistake because now g4, and black is actually losing the bishop even if white is playing only with the pawns, which is very funny, but he cannot save the bishop. So black has to play something else. Usually he plays h6 or h5. And now already after g4, he can even go to d7. In fact, he has to go to d7, because if he continues to play like normal, here this is another trap. White can play the move e6, very strong move. A pawn sacrifice, which it is to delay the development of the bishop. And now in case of this move, white takes control of the light squares. He wants to capture now, so if black takes, after queen takes, now of course it is, if black goes knight d7, it will be a checkmate. But if he plays something else, instead of giving this check, you can first play knight f3, and then to jump knight e5, and then already queen g6 and knight f7, and white should win here very easy. So that's why after g4, black has to go in this case to d7. And now white usually goes h5, because otherwise black can play h5, and then when you move the pawn, he can go back to f5. And this is extremely complicated line as well. And in this line, if white takes the pawn, black takes. Now there are two deviations. If white goes c4, so-called pawn of attack, or if white plays a normal move. If white goes bishop d3, this is a good move with the idea to stop bishop f5. And now again white wants to force black to play e6 to close the bishop. He cannot go to f5, he cannot go to g4. And here white can sometimes play c3. Again he is waiting for the bishop to move, or to e6. And now he has to play bishop to f4. So simply he is delaying knight f3 in order to avoid this pin. Because now if black moves here, white can choose between many moves, even queen b3, knight e2, or even f3. And then the bishop has to go to h5 and g6. So yeah, this is another interesting idea in this system. Or the pawn of attack, finally, is when white goes c4, and then he plays knight c3, and then he plays knight f3. And here there are different variations for black. Bishop g4 is possible, pawn takes is possible, or e6. Also with a very complicated game. In general, Caro Kann tend to lead to more solid positions. So yeah, the members of the chess club who want to play more solid with black and to avoid some attacking and sharp positions can take a look at this opening.